This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show.
Epistolary novels used to be all the rage. Think Clarissa, think Dracula, think the more recent We Need to Talk About Kevin. And last year saw another smash hit epistolary novel, The Correspondent by Virginia Evans, published to wide acclaim and stellar sales and shortlisted for the 2026 Women's Fiction Prize. 3 times a week, 73-year-old Sybil von Antwerp sits down at her desk in her Maryland home in the US to write her letters. Her correspondence has been, as she puts it, the mainstay of my life. And the book is as much a tribute to the power of letters as it is to the doughty Sybil herself. Virginia was in Dublin this June for the Carlo University Pittsburgh's MFA in Creative Writing programme, residency at Trinity College Dublin, and we're very grateful to Programme Director Tess Barry for allowing us to feature this interview on Books for Breakfast. The interviewer is noted writer Carlo Gebler, who was also Virginia's mentor during the year she spent on the Creative Writing MPhil in Trinity, so she's in familiar territory in Trinity's Graduate Memorial Building. It's a fascinating and very wide-ranging conversation about this novel, but also very much about the life of a supremely dedicated writer and the highs and lows of the writing life in general. So grab a coffee and sit back and listen to Carlo Gebler and Virginia Evans.
Good afternoon. This is Virginia Evans. I'm Carlo Gebler. What I want to say before we begin is we always welcome adulation from the audience. If any of you during the course of this conversation want to, make any adulatory comments, please feel free. Which is a long-winded way of saying you're free to interrupt in the nicest way, because it's much better to have a conversation than something which is sort of closed off from everybody. Now, I did have a set of questions, and I've just decided I'm going to toss them aside. I'm not going to use them at all. So when I was looking in The Guardian, I saw that you'd you provided them with an account of your book, The Books of My Life. And I was struck by the fact that there were 2 John Steinbecks. Okay.
It's not critical. Okay.
This isn't there's nothing slippery here. It's not critical. Just tell us why. I mean, these people are Americans, and
all
American?
Well,
there's an Irish person called Brian Layden over there. He's with me. And there's Mr. Sirr, of course, who's an Irish person, and there's Enda. But we're mostly Americans here. And he is a great American writer. And I'm curious to know whether it was his literary capacity or the other things that come associated with Steinbeck, which is that he was a social critic, and which we will come on to when we start talking about The Correspondent. Embedded in the story is social criticism.
Take it away.
Take it away. Please.
It has nothing to do with the social position. And I discovered Steinbeck young, and I didn't have a social position when I was reading Steinbeck for the first time. I didn't have a, I was building out what I understood about the world. But when I read The Grapes of Wrath, I was 15, and I was 15 and I lived in the security of my family home, and so what it was only the storytelling is why I was drawn to Steinbeck. And to me, it was the way you move through the pages, and every page makes you turn the next page because you must know what happens next. I think he's very, very good at that. And there's no, I never felt that book as a 15-year-old, as a 15-year-old, it's very, you could be very quickly bogged down or lost, and I was by Jane Austen and, plenty of classic novels, but by Steinbeck I wasn't. And I felt that I could fly through, turning the pages. I think East of Eden is the same way. I mean, it's that idea. There's this idea that I'm sure this is not just Elizabeth Strout, but she said this in an interview one time. She said, every scene with either a sense of urgency or promise. And I think Steinbeck does that very well. And that's always what I am trying to do. Every scene, not that there has to be a dead body or, an explosion, but that every scene has to have one of those two things that urges you, I think, to the next scene.
What about his evocation of America, of the specificity of place and voice? Did that speak to you when you were a 15-year-old?
It must have done. And I think as reading his treatment of America as an American is sort of one thing. And I guess reading his treatment of America as someone who's not American is also a different, you see it from a lens outside of being in America. And I was seeing it from the inside. But in some ways that's not true, because he was writing about things that I haven't lived through, and places in America I've never been. And America is so big. And so my experience of being in how I was raised on the East Coast, kind of near the sea, and is a different way than what he's talking about. But I think The Grapes of Wrath specifically, I've always found that I understand history better when a novel is told about a time in history and it's a good novel, and then I feel I could understand what happened there better than if I sat in history class or read a textbook. That has to be true for everyone. But, if a good novel takes you into a time. And so I remember we were learning about the Dust Bowl and kind of that era of American history, but then I read The Grapes of Wrath, and then it was sort of that, oh, okay, now I understand what that is. I didn't understand that from a textbook, but I understand this from the story.
What is it that a novel does that is better than a history lesson?
Do you think it's just telling a human story?
Well, I think it's. I mean, obviously, you have something to identify with. You have a character with whom you can follow. And I think it also, history can be bloodless, and it is not bloodless. It has weather, maybe, or, the wind, or the smell of the shirt that you're wearing. It has got all those things that refer to human experience that are left out.
And it's like, if you're learning history, it's sort of sitting in a chair and the history is on the board and somebody's saying, this is what happened on this day and this is what happened on this day. But if you read the book, you dive inside and then you're there and just like you're saying, you're smelling it and seeing it and feeling it. And I remember when I came and lived over here the year I was in school, I read as much I only read Irish literature because I was trying to understand a place that I had never even been before. And I felt that people could tell me this is Irish, this is how Irish independence went. This was how the Civil War was. This is how it works with the North, and this is how it works with the border, and this is how it works. But I didn't understand those things until I read books. Like, I remember reading One by One in the Darkness and thinking, oh, okay, that's what this is. Or Milkman. Oh, that's what this is. And reading the stories, then I felt like I could internalize what the history had been, but I was not able to internalize just by someone sitting there saying, it's this, and this is the politics, and these are the parties, and this is, these are the who's who. I didn't understand, but when I could read the stories, then I could understand, I think. Or start to understand. Later,
we could discuss the degree to which the Correspondent acts as a work of history. But let's not go there yet. What kind of a 15-year-old were you?
Oh, you would have felt so sorry for me.
I'm sure you were.
No,
I'm sure you were delightful.
I was delightful. I was not cool. I never
Really?
played a sport. I've never played a sport. One time. I've never played. My friend turned 40 2 years ago, and we played a sport we have in the States called pickleball. Do you know this? It's
No.
embarrassing. It's actually an
No.
embarrassing sport.
What does pickleball involve?
It's sort of like tennis meets ping pong. Full court. Anyway, she had a party, and there was a pickleball party, and it was the first time I ever played a sport. So anyway, I'm going too far, but I never played a sport, and I was very bookish, but I wasn't good in school. I didn't get good grades. I wasn't a good student, but I read a lot of books, but not even great books,
Were you inattentive in school?
No, I really tried. I really tried in school, but I just couldn't. I was terrible at math, and I can't remember dates and history. I mean, I really didn't do well in any courses in school.
I mean, clearly the school was looking for the wrong thing.
It wasn't looking for me.
Well, schools very often are. They make that mistake, especially with writers.
Yeah.
And you said that you read, I noticed you used the word junk.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of junk?
My parents would buy whatever was sort of the summer read, like the new John Grisham or the new, what else is in that category? Tom Clancy. And then they would read it and leave it out, and then I would read it. So I read those things very young. I mean, I like those books. I still like those books. Or I read the Jurassic Park books, like the Michael Crichton Jurassic Park. And then, I mean, I read children's series, I read all the Nancy Drew, and I read all the Boxcar Children, sort of the things that were, anything that was a mystery or sort of a thriller, I would always read.
Right.
And then I got into, my family were, working people. They weren't academic or artistic. They were just we were all working people. Everybody worked, and that was what that was the presence in our house. And so I always came home alone because my sister and my brother played sports. So I would come home and be alone, and I would read or watch television or ride my bike. And I think when I got into high school, which would be, like 14, and started to take English classes, English lit classes, that's when they started giving me books like The Grapes of Wrath and things like that, and saying, you have to read this. But then I found that was the moment for me of, I didn't know this kind of world existed in books. I didn't know books could be so smart or good or moving or thoughtful or...
Do you remember a specific text which made you think, oh, wait a second, I think I'm onto something now?
I mean, Grapes of Wrath was the first one for me. I read Lord Jim in those years, and I felt that way about that. I read Wuthering Heights that same year, and I think I had good teachers for those books. And but it was the first time that I was good at school. It was the first time that I could do something that, I could read a book, and when the teacher says, okay, in this scene, we're talking about whatever the event is in the scene, and her looking at everybody for some sort of answer, and, and people wanting to give a flat answer. And I felt I understood what she was asking, which was, what is this about? What does this say about human nature? What is happening here? And I felt that was the first time I was good at what I was being asked to do.
And did that revelation prompt writing, or were you simply at that moment a valve working one way, just taking language in?
I think I was just taking in, and I didn't ever, again, I think as I look back, I think it's so much of the story of my life is the fact that I didn't come from a family or a world where people were writers or artistic people. It just wasn't. That wasn't an option. It wasn't that it wasn't an option in any sort of horrible way. It just wasn't. It wasn't an option. It wasn't something anyone thought about doing. Nobody thought about I wouldn't have ever thought. I don't even think I ever thought anything about authors. I just read a book. I didn't think about the person behind the book, I don't think. And But I know the gears in my head were changing probably during those years, because it was that feeling of finding the thing that I understood and that I loved, which was good storytelling, and the feeling of it's not enough just to read it. It's like not enough. And so then I think what I was figuring out was that I was a writer and that I wanted to write it as well. But I don't think I knew that until I was in undergrad.
And did something prompt it?
In undergrad?
Yeah. I mean, were you required to write an essay about something personal?
I was taking English lit classes, and then in the catalog of courses, there were creative writing classes. And I think I probably thought, oh, I'll try that. And that's when I started. There was this great teacher, Inman Majors. He's a wonderful writer, and he was teaching composition. And then there was another teacher, a professor named Joan Frederick, and I think she was in her 80s when I had her. And she had been teaching this fiction. Maybe she had advanced composition and he had fiction. And I took those classes, and, it was sort of like in school here, every week you have to bring in 5 pages or whatever. How many words is that? I don't know. But so many words or so many pages, and you have to bring it, and then sometimes your work gets discussed and sometimes it doesn't. And there's so much, I feel like so much of the narrative of writing is that it's laborious and horrible, but I just enjoyed it so much. I just thought it was so enjoyable. And I think it's because it's like the first thing I studied that there wasn't a right answer. There wasn't something you had to figure out and write it down, or some essay about the Civil War and you had to get the generals right. It wasn't like that. It was anything is enough. Anything works if it's done well. And this teacher, Joan Frederick, she, on my final paper that first year, she said, not everybody can write. And she said, either you have it or you don't, and you have it. And then I thought, okay, that's what I'll do.
And that was the gate.
That was the gate.
That opened.
And she died a few years ago, and I never got to tell her that she was right. But
yeah. I mean, it's interesting about the things that act as the permissive moment. Because I remember, for me, I entered the Evening Standard playwriting competition. I had no interest in plays.
How old were you?
14. And I came second. But that was... And I just wrote a little thing about people talking. And it was... When I got the letter back with the Evening Standard masthead and all the rest of it, and I think probably £10 book voucher or something.
That was it?
Oh, my God. That was just incredible.
I know.
Like Joan saying some people have it and some people don't. Did you talk to her after she'd said that, or did you just leave the room? She
handed back, on our last day, she handed back, and she graded your final portfolio, and then she wrote this very, very, very small computer font handwriting, and she wrote this little message about my work, and then she said, and it was a little longer, but I just remember that last thing she said, that either you have it or you don't, and you have it.
And that was a personal essay, I presume?
I think it was a short story.
It was a short story. And what then followed that? What did you then do with this permission?
Then I completed, you couldn't take a major in creative writing at where I went to school. And so I majored in English literature and I minored in creative writing. And I mean, when I was 19, I studied abroad in Italy and I wrote my first novel. I started writing my first novel then. And I wrote novels until this, one after the other.
Right. Were they useful?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
In what way?
The first 5 novels I wrote, thank God thank God they're not part of the canon of what will be my work. But this is, going back to something I said earlier, just about kind of finding my own way through being a writer. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I mean, I had those professors in school, but there wasn't a conversation about, minoring in creative writing when you're 18, 19, 20 years old is not the same as a conversation with someone who's trying to help you find your way as a novelist. Those were training wheels, and very, very helpful training wheels. But so then, once I leave school and I'm doing this and I'm working and then eventually getting married and having kids, I never knew another writer. I never knew who to ask. I had no one to talk to about it. So I think I was just learning. I mean, I was teaching myself. I was just always reading and writing novels and reading and writing novels and reading for the enjoyment, but also because I think as a writer, part of the reading experience is the education that you get from reading and understand, trying to read to say, teach me how do you do this? And how does it work? And so writing those earlier books, it's like I was looking at, I was looking over here on one side at the book I was reading and over here on one side at the draft I was writing and trying to understand, like, how does this become this? And not having anybody to ask. And so just thinking, okay, I'm trusting that I understand what good fiction is. I'm trusting that I understand that I can recognize a good story, but also understanding I cannot yet write it. I don't know how. And so then I think the book I wrote before I came to Trinity, I think was quite good. But it didn't get published. I mean, maybe you know this. I wrote 7 novels. None of them were published. And then I wrote this book and now it is. But the one I wrote before school, before I came here, I think was good. And I would say looking back, by that point, I had learned how to write a novel.
If you think about these 7 books now, objectively, do you see an upward trajectory? Do you think, oh yeah, with the first one it was, second one I'd solved this problem, third one I'd advanced. Do you have that sense? Or maybe it's something you don't think about.
I don't really think about it, but I'm thinking about it now. I think this novel, I think is all right. I think the one I wrote as in school here is better. And I think the one I wrote before that was good enough to be published. It's sort of like it did go like this for a while, but then I sort of hit a moment where I think I understood how to write a novel, and I wrote a good novel, and then I wrote another good novel, and then I wrote this. And so, I have no sense of bitterness about that. I feel fine about it. It's fine. I just think that's part of it.
It was training.
Yeah. And training on how to write a novel, and then training on how to get a thick skin and be okay that everybody tells you you're not good enough, which is when I met you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes. When you finished The Correspondent, you said, how did you know it was okay?
I mean, you told me it was okay.
That is as may be.
True.
But the internal, because you're a very astute judge of work, so you know the value or the weight or the heft of something, and even with something that you're enmeshed with, which is a book that you've produced, but you did sort of know this was, as you put it, okay. So, what was it that did that for you?
I suppose I just had gotten to a point where I trusted myself that I could do it. And I knew I could do it. And I knew I was good enough. And I knew I could write a better book than a lot of books I read that were published. I just knew that. And I think I finally trusted that that was true. But even this book, I mean, I think for me, I've always, I don't know how it is for everybody, but when I get to the end, it feels like there's a tipping point where the work on the book feels invigorating and energized. And then all of a sudden it just feels like I got to spit it out of my mouth. It's kind of like, I'm done. I'm just all done. That's it. That's the best I can do. I've said that to my husband every time I've finished a book. That's the best I can do. Yeah. And then, then it goes to somebody else like you or my agent or my editor. And then they might be able to bring it, 10 more %, and say, well, this is pretty good, but it's not perfect. But I think I got to the end of the book and I knew that was the best book I could write at the time. And I've always felt that the motivation I have always felt for writing another novel has never been to be published and has always been that I think I could do better. So, I finished this book and I sent it away and I thought I can do better than that.
So has each text that you've been produced been a reply to or a response to its predecessor?
Yes, probably. Does it feel, I don't know if you feel this way, but I've always found that there's a thread or some sort of, something from the book I just finished leaps to the next one and gets answered in the next one, and then that's resolved. But something from this one leaps to the next one that wasn't resolved and gets resolved. And then that keeps happening like that, and which is great. Because I know it will do that forever.
Well, it will keep going, actually. It's an organic, you're an organic thing. Stuff happens, content is produced, or whatever we call it, and it is affecting you. Even as you're putting it onto the page, it's recalibrating your brain and leading to new something.
And even if they're not really connected, it's like they're connected to me, but maybe not to anyone else.
Yeah, no, yes, absolutely. But I would say the act of producing a book reorganizes the psyche. And the reorganization of the psyche leads the psyche on to something new because of the way in which it's been recalibrated. So this is a book in letters. What attracted you to the epistolary novel?
Why? Why would you do this?
The epistolary novel has a long history. Liaison Dangereuse, which was made into a film. Chris Krause's, have you read Chris Krause's book, I Love Dick? That is also a book in letters and actually refers back to the epistolary tradition. The Colour Purple, Kafka's letter to his father. It's non-fiction, but it's part of that tradition. Was that what prompted you? Were you provoked by the tradition, or did you just think, this Sybil von Antwerp, I've got her and I know how she writes. I shall refer to her as SVA for the rest of this.
It's how I also refer to myself now.
Yes. Yeah. What did it for you?
It's funny that you are asking me this question, which is a question that you would ask me. But I was in a signing line one time for the book. Some things in signing lines would make your blood run cold. The things people ask you or say to you. And this woman came up to me and she leaned across the table and she got so close to my face and she said, I have a PhD in the epistolary tradition. And I was like, oh no. And she said, and she started doing exactly what you're doing, but worse, and rattling off these old, you must have read this, and I'm sure you read this, and you must have studied extensively how the epistolary novel, and I was kind of doing this and sweating a little bit, and finally I just had to come clean, and I just said, listen, I said, it sounds like you did a lot of hard work that I know nothing about. She was very disappointed, but no, I read 84 Charing Cross Road and I got to the end. Do we know this book? Do people know this book? It's an epistolary book. It's so good. It's very short. It's Helene Hanff, and she was writing letters from her Manhattan apartment in the 50s, 60s, 70s, up to the 80s, I believe. Maybe it ends in the 70s. And she was looking for very, very obscure books she was a collector of very obscure books in Latin and things. And she was fed up because, of course, in New York City, you can't find these very old books that were published in like the 1700s. And so she strikes up this relationship with a bookstore in London. And so the book, this book, it's very small. I mean, I'm writing the intro for the re-release of the Penguin. I don't know, something. I'm writing something. And I had to reread the book. And so I read it on a flight from Detroit to Atlanta. So it's short. You can read the whole book. But the book, what I'm going to say is going to answer your question, Carlo. The book is about a woman in New York wanting rare books. And that sounds boring and very flat. It is so interesting and vivid and not boring and not flat, because it starts with that, but then the humanity of these people sort of starts to make its way into the letters. It starts off with, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, I live here, I'm looking for a book, do you have it?" The man writes back, "Dear ma'am, we do not have it. I will keep my eyes out. Sincerely, whatever, Mr. Dole." But then throughout the book, you get this unbelievable story of human connection, and all these people that work at the bookstore or are adjacent to the bookstore, and this woman who lives in New York City who, has this sort of vivid life, but she is alone, and she would sort of, her life's dream is to visit London. And so she kind of, I don't know, the book is just very moving. It's sort of like magic. That book is like magic, because you think, what a boring concept, and it's this big. So it feels like nothing, but it's so vivid. And so I got to the end, and I thought, for me, do you think this is true? Whenever I start a new book, I'm writing what I want to read next. So what I wanted to read was more of that, but I wanted more. I wanted it to be bigger. I wanted it to be longer. I wanted it to tell a bigger story. I wanted it to be sprawling. I wanted it to kind of cross countries and cross, oceans. I wanted that book, but I wanted more. And so that's what I thought, I'll try to write it.
Do you think one of the virtues of the letter form is it cuts out the writer? Mm-hmm. Yes. So that you actually just only have the character, because you've given them, and it isn't just SVA we hear from, so we can talk, so the scale is bigger than 84 Charing Cross, but she's the primary voice. So you get her without anything in the way. It's even beyond first person.
It's like not even a narrative voice. It's just the person. It's just, it's so wild when I think about it, because I just didn't give any of this any consideration, which is funny, because I remember being in school and having remember Claire saying, you have to decide, like first person or third, but you have to make these decisions, and you have to make, Claire Keegan was one of my professors. And there has to be a reason for your decision, and you have to know exactly why you chose that. And I always felt so nervous about that, oh God, I'm not up to it. I'm not up to the task. I'm not smart enough for this. And so I sort of think everything I learned from Claire was right, but I also am finding my own way. And I didn't think about it. I didn't think about what would be lost or what would be gained in the format. I never thought about telling the story in any other way than in letters. I thought, I'm going to write a book in letters. That's what I'm going to do. And I didn't read any old ones. I didn't give it any thought. I just started writing the first letter, and it's still the first letter, and I never edited it. So, it's just, it really is inexplicable why it worked without me giving it very much thought. Maybe
it was because you didn't give it any thought. It was a direct expression of feeling from the unconscious. Did SVA, Sybil, click first?
Yes.
And what kind of a person is SVA? What sort of a human being?
I would describe her as a very sort of balanced person that reminds me of almost all the women that were part of my life growing up. My aunts and I'm from kind of the northeast of the United States, and there's, this personality of direct and capable and independent and opinionated, thoughtful, smart. She felt very known to me. Interestingly, people come to me and say, "What an outlandish person," and I think, well, she seems very regular to me. And I get a lot of feedback that people don't like her, which also I feel baffled by, but it's okay if you hated her, it's fine. But I don't understand. I just think she seems very normal. And that was the other thing that had happened right before I started writing this book. I had read Stoner. Actually, I remember writing to you and telling you I had just finished this book, Stoner. Have people read Stoner by John Williams? Okay. It's an exceptional book, and it is the opening page of the book is kind of like his obituary, and it says, William Stoner was born on this day in a farm in Illinois, and he was raised on the farm, and then he went into university near his home, and he was supposed to be a farmer, but he went into academia. He married, he had a daughter, he died. And that's like the first page. And, you read something like that and you think, well, there's the obituary of the most boring person that ever lived. That's boring. That's not an interesting life. But I think the exercise, I don't know what John Williams was doing or why he wrote the book, but what I read is that for the rest of the novel, you see the life of William Stoner from birth to death. That's the novel. And it's riveting. It's riveting. It's the most I thought it was the most compelling, and I've had this experience maybe 5 times in my life. At the very end, I had to lay on the floor because I was so overcome, and I just remember crying and laying on the floor for a long time and being so overwhelmed and thinking, what he just did was show you that nobody's life is boring. This is the obituary of the most boring person that ever lived. And then you read the book and nobody's life is boring. And I think that was rattling around in my head. And so I think that was some challenge that I was motivated by. Like, could you tell a story of a sort of a regular woman? And she's towards the end of her life. And especially in America, I think women at a certain age, it's like you start to get deleted, or like you start to disappear. And I don't know if that's true everywhere, but that's certainly true in America. And I just think you just start to disappear right when you have the most wisdom and the most interesting things to say is when you're suddenly not being sought after for your thoughts on things or your memories or your history. And so I wanted to tell that story.
It absolutely does demonstrate that a so-called ordinary life, there is no such thing as an ordinary life. Every life is exceptional. Mm-hmm. But the way in which it goes about it is completely untraditional. So we were talking a moment ago, there's a car, not a car crash, but the SVA totals her car or does something to it, and it wrecks it, and it's a couple of lines. Whereas when I read that, I thought, well, if in a John Updike novel, this would be 40 pages. You'd have all the crash and the feelings about the crash and bringing the person to tow it away. And it's all of that kind of stuff, all the things that novels traditionally have to deal with is completely jettisoned. The character's death is
not even there.
No. So was that did you go to this form to save you from the burden of doing it the traditional way?
No.
No, you went to this form because
I read that book and I wanted to do it.
Because you read 84. And you just thought, I'm going to have some more of this.
I want to do that.
Okay.
I thought, I want to do that. I can do that. And that always is sort of my motivator. I can do that. I want to do that, and I can do that. And that's how I felt reading The Grapes of Wrath. That is how I felt reading East of Eden. That is how I felt reading Wuthering Heights. I have this, and I know that's madness, and I know I can't do that, but I do feel when I read good books or stories, I think, okay, I see how that's done. I can do that. I understand how that works. And so with this, it is so interesting. There's so much missing. It's almost like I've been having this conversation with, they're writing a screenplay. And so I've been having this conversation with the screenwriter. And we have been having this kind of ongoing conversation, which is that whatever the movie is, almost will be filling in the pencil drawing that's here with color, because nothing happens in the book. Nothing happens in the book because it's letters. You never see a scene. You never see the car crash. You never see her die. You never see her discover her family. You never see any of it. It's not there. It's really not in the book. But the movie feels to me like it'll be a compliment. Like you will see it. But when I think about what this book is, it's almost like I wrote the scaffolding of a story or sort of some framing, like the framing of a house. And the framing is there and you see after it or before it. But there are the only times I can think in the book where you get any indication of like the weather or anything is if in a letter, maybe she says, I was walking by the river and it was raining. Yeah. But your brain then fills that whole scene with, okay, I can see, but there's some way I do think that the story is vivid. I do think you picture all these things happening, but it's not there. I didn't write it.
Well, the thing is, I thought a lot about, Hemingway's iceberg theory when I was reading it. And I thought a lot about things that I'd read about palimpsests, old manuscripts that had been cleaned and scrubbed and then people had written new things on it, but you could see the old words bleeding through. What I was incredibly conscious of when I was reading was that there's something palimpsesty about a letter because it bears the ghostly imprint of what it was that prompted it, to which it is the reply. So every single time you read a letter, you're also reading the prompt. And sometimes you're reading several prompts. When you get to the Fiona, the daughter, you have a sense of a sort of long line of receding mirrors going back into the past. And that means that it's very dense experience in a good way, but also you have to pay attention. You got to go, yes.
That was I think I know exactly what you're saying, which is that you run the what would be terminal for the book in letters. The risk you run is that you start to build a thing that goes out like this because there's all this reaching out from the center point, which is this woman's life. But there's all these, appendages of, or a better way of saying it maybe is strands kind of stretching to other people. And really, when I was writing it, I was very aware that you can't let any of those things go too far. You have to keep everything almost like holding the strings of all the kites and making sure that nothing just wanders away. I remember, okay, I'm going to stand up. Wait, but then you won't be able to hear me. Is that okay? I'm going to show you something. Did I show you this when you were in Pittsburgh, the braid? Okay, then I won't stand up. But this is what Claire taught us. She said that when you start a story, you have, those doors in fraternity houses with the beads hanging down. Yeah. Okay. So she says when you start a story, you have the strands hanging in the door jamb. And that as you're writing the story, you're plaiting the strands into the story. And, you're kind of drawing them in and making sure. And she said at the end, they all have to fit in the tie-off or they have to be cut from the top. So if anything was there at the beginning, but it's not there at the end, it should never have been there. And I think about it every day when I write. Every day I think about that. If I'm revising or if I'm writing, if I bring this in, does it bear on the end? If it doesn't bear on the end, don't bring it in. Trim it down, trim it down, trim it down. And that's really helpful. And it was helpful when I was writing this book because it did feel that I had to be sure that none of those strands of relationships or things that happen in the book or people were just there for any self-indulgent reason as a writer if they didn't bear on the story, if it didn't feel authentic. But to keep track of that, when I was writing, I just felt like I always kind of had it all in my head. I wasn't writing it down. I didn't have outlines or anything. It wasn't like I had some things beside my desk saying like, here's this person and here's where they were. I just felt like I had just enough that I could keep everybody in my hands and sort of intuitively know, okay, this is where this person has to come back and this is how. But, you know, the way the book kind of comes to an end, there's every other person is a loose end because you don't know what happens with their life once Sybil's gone. All of those stories are essentially a loose end. But it had to be in a way that served. It's okay that they were a loose end unto themselves and their life, but they couldn't be a loose end for the story.
And did you have the experience? So you've got the two children, the brother, the neighbor, the friend with the son. That's 6 strands. Then her own correspondence with other people, the 7th, the internet, ancestry, and what that leads to, 8. And there must be more.
Yeah, probably 20.
And the university.
Mm-hmm.
When you were, so you're writing instinctively. I'm going to write. She's going to write to her brother. Now she's going to hear from her son. Now I'm going to talk to Theodore. Whatever. Did you ever, when you were doing it, think, oh, wait a second, hang on, better go back 20 pages. I need to plait something else in. Mm-hmm. Or did it just all arrive in the order in which it's more or less presented as we read it? Did your unconscious do it all?
I think so.
I love the unconscious.
I think it did. And I remember, it's so hard to remember how you write something. I remember kind of the feeling of writing a letter and thinking, okay, now here we are with this. What else do we need? Okay, here we are. What else? Okay, here we are. What then? What then? And then it was always this thing of, you know, kind of staying on the railroad tracks and you know, building it, but keeping it tight. I felt that it could just get so unwieldy, but I had to keep it very, very tight. And it is tight, even though there are all of these things. I will say, I wrote it, and it was in its order, more or less, but then I sent it to you, and you read it, and you said that the present actions of things that actually happened to her in these years of her life, not memories or not reflections or not things that you understand later that happened when she was younger, but the things that are happening in real time, you told me, were too heavy on the back and light on the front. And you said I had to treat it like a screenplay and make sure there were beats of action every so many pages or every so many words. And that was very helpful. And I have said that in an interview. And somebody was like, who is this man? Can we talk to him? And I'm like, no, you cannot. He's only for me. But this was so helpful. And so that was, I remember kind of, I mean, everything to me is very visual, but I remember sort of like pulling events further in, closer to the beginning, to space them out in that sort of not rhythmic way, but you said it feels unnatural, but it is what is the engine of somebody keeping reading, is these kind of moments of, you know, if you have moments of reflection and you have, you know, moments of whatever, humor or low action, that's okay, but there have to be these punctuations of events or it doesn't work. And you were right.
Did you know where you were going? You knew that
yes.
She was going to die.
Yeah, I knew she was going to die, and I knew, which was so helpful, I think. You know, just kind of knowing that was going to be the end point. I knew I was writing to an ultimate point of her death, and I just really wanted to have total oversight of her life. I didn't want there to be that feeling at the end of a book of like, I wonder what happens next, or did they end up doing this, or did she end up making amends with, I don't know. I wanted oversight. And so I knew she was going to die, and I knew that her approach to death was going to be something that was an opening of her life rather than a...
And the unsent letters, you knew about those from the beginning?
Yes, the first time I wrote the book, I wrote that letter almost the same way it is as the final letter. And then, and I don't, whatever magic was happening in my mind that day, I just salute it, because I don't think I could have thought of that again. But I remember my editor saying we should take it out, that there's like the final letter in the book.
Really?
Yeah, she said we should take it out. And she said, it's so down. It's such a down.
Really?
And I just disagreed. And so I said, I'm unwilling to take it out. And she was like, that's fine. That's fine.
Extraordinary. She wanted something more upbeat. Yeah.
She did.
No,
I wasn't
quite
going
right.
to do it.
Make people suffer.
Make them suffer.
In what way is this, what do you think this book, it's telling us that there is no such thing as an unexceptional or ordinary life. It's telling us to pay attention. It's offering us counsel. There's a sort of subterranean logic to our lives which will work its way through, and the things that trouble us and hobble us have, in unexpected ways of becoming untroubling and stopping hobbling us. We have to have that kind of trust. It won't be what we expect. But what else is the book, in your opinion, telling us? What is it telling us about the present?
I think that what the book is, or what I wanted it to be, and I hope that it is, was a very authentic, or sort of not even balanced, but a true picture of what life feels like, which is that it feels horrible and it feels amazing and everything in between all the time at the same time. That's my feeling and my experience, and this whole idea of, joy and sorrow together. That's what everyone's life, I think that's what everyone's life feels like. I don't think anyone gets to the end of life and thinks that they had an easy go. Like, nobody thinks, well, that was a breeze. Nobody thinks that. And but I really wanted to tell the truth, I guess, about what it feels like to live. And I guess the feeling at the end, kind of the end of the book, she dies, but it's okay, because she's lived this good life and she's made amends and she's experienced forgiveness and has offered forgiveness, and there's been things that she's been able to make peace with, and she's not alone. But then the last letter, you sort of get to this point where she dies and you think, okay, even though it's sad that she's not here, that was good. But then the last letter is really tough. She's trying to, it's a letter that she tried to write to her ex-husband, who has preceded her in death, and she could never send it. And it's her just sort of like, you could just see her like agonizing over trying to write this letter to this man that she loves, but messed everything up. And the last lines of the book are, "I'm going blind. If I can't see, what do I have?" And I feel that when she wrote those lines, her answering herself was nothing. If I go blind, I have nothing left, because I write letters and I live alone, and this is the mainstay of my life, is being able to do those things. But from the page before that she went blind and she had a lot. And so I think, I think there was a big sense of writing from a place of like grief and sadness and disappointment in my own life. And this sense of, even though at the end of her life there was really some beauty and some relief, it didn't delete all of the hard things, all of the difficulty and pain that came before. It's all together. It's not like, people will say to me, you did 20 years of work, trying and failing and rejection and everything, but now it's great because you have this. And that's true, but also it doesn't mean that those years didn't exist or aren't part of who I am. And it's important to, I guess, I wanted the book to feel like this is a full life. This is what it feels like. But when you close the book to think, no matter what happened, you could still be okay. You know, she sort of suffered the worst. But then at the end, I do think you close the book and you think, but okay, she's okay.
I mean, I took the meaning of the book to be a corrective to the which exists in literature and elsewhere, you know, in popular culture, to the, you know, cult of boosterism. You know, the only way is up, and it's all going to be grand, and all the rest of it. And that kind of ideological position, which is a refutation, actually an annihilation of suffering. Yeah. It says we're just going to make it invisible, and we're only going to have the up stuff, and well, apart from it being very unhealthy, it makes the kind of fiction which reflects those truths, of which there is quite a lot in the world, ultimately unnourishing, because it doesn't contribute to growth. Whereas you read The Correspondent and you go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, she did this, she did that, and her life works itself out, but not in the way that she could possibly have predicted. And there are certain things that will never be worked out.
That's right. I think that's the biggest part. I mean, not the biggest part, but it's really important. It's exactly what you're saying. There's some things that you can't fix.
No, some suffering cannot be made to go away. But none of that was in your mind consciously when you were writing. It just effloresced joyfully on the page. Did you have trouble tracking the different lines of... No. See? It's that easy, people.
I was lost in my mind. I mean, I wrote this during COVID, and I wrote... we had just moved back from Ireland, and we were living in this very small rental, and there was nowhere to write. So I had put my desk into the closet of our bathroom closet. And I used to write very, very early in the morning before everybody got up, and then I went to work. And so I would write in there and you're in the closet. I mean, it's like dark and you don't know if the sun's up or not. You know, it's like you wake up at 4:30 and then you go in and it's dark and then you don't know. And so there was this sort of, I mean, I was really in a vacuum of my own, you know, I was very much alone in my mind. So I think I was able to keep track of it. I know that what I was doing was writing a book that was like just getting all of this feeling out of myself, which was this understanding of what life feels like, which is, it's so hard. It's so unexpected. It's so much more painful than, I mean, she says that in the book, and that's like a direct feeling from my own brain, which was, nobody told me how hard this was going to be. I mean, I have felt that way in my adult life many times. Why did nobody warn me how horrible this was going to be? And that, I think, was the sentiment I was writing out of, but also knowing, on the other hand, but look how beautiful my life is. Look at look what I have. I have my family and my children and these wonderful friends, and I had this experience, and I get to be a writer, and I get to have my legs work, and I get to see the world. You know, there's all these things that I know I just feel like is so wonderful, but also it's so hard to just like be a human being. And so I think I did know that was what I was trying to put on the page.
But the book also has built into it Sybil's understanding of the value that literature and the word properly deployed offers the troubled psyche. So she is writing and making sense. Okay, she's got a rage to order, so she puts things down on the page, and that helps. But you know, although the book doesn't really go into it too much, that she's also plugged into this bank of stuff, literature, the culture, which has flowed into her and which forms the bedrock of her psyche. And that is something that, you know, we can't exist without culture. So the book is an argument for culture in a time when Philistinism is raging, but it doesn't it's not done emphatically. It just comes along as a sideways thing. And I think it's the sidebar is what I mean. That is very interesting because there are very few, and people write essays saying, we need culture. But there are not many novels that slyly, cunningly introduce this argument, but it is an argument we need to hear.
Yeah, the presence of I didn't think the book would be published. It's hard. It's hard for me to emphasize. Yes, I didn't. Everything I tried to sell failed. You just get to thinking like, I will never do this. I know I should do this, but this will never work for me. And that was definitely where I was. And I really thought my novel From Here would sell, and it didn't. And then you sort of think, well, if that can't sell, then nothing can sell. And that's my best, and I can't do any better. And so when I was writing the book, I truly did not have any vision for even giving it to my agent. My book was out. My book From Here, American Photographic, was out on submission to editors when I started writing The Correspondent, and my agent had said to me, you should start writing. Hillary had said, you should start writing something else. And it's just so horrible to have that said. That's horrible news. Your book's out on submission. You should probably start writing something else. God, you think like when it's out on submission, you've done it. Your job is done. It's going to be published. I've got it. I have the agent. They're going to do it. And then it doesn't sell. It's just like really disheartening. And that happened to me twice. And so I think with this book, I was going to keep writing, but this book was not the book I was planning on giving to my agent next. I was going to write this book, and then I was calling it my palate cleanser. And my agent, who lives in Toronto, would call down to me. I live in North Carolina, and she would say, "What are you doing down there?" And I would say, "I'm cleansing my palate." She's like, "How long is that going to take?" And so I just really didn't. I was not going to give it to anyone. I wasn't going to send it to you. I wasn't going to send it to her. I was going to write it for myself, and then I was going to write something else. And so when I was writing it, it was just mine. It was just for me. I had no audience in mind other than myself. And so all the books and the literature and the culture that was woven in was just what I wanted in the story. Yeah, I was writing this book for myself to enjoy.
Why do you think it was published?
I have no idea, except I have to think I wrote the book that I wanted to read for me. And it turns out it's also the book that a lot of other people wanted to read as well. Why do you think?
I think it's because you were writing it with your left hand, is why. So you weren't writing it for publication. So therefore, nothing else got in the way. All those unconscious things that come up, which you absorb from the zeitgeist and the culture. I should do this. That's not going to pass muster. So none of that was clouding your unconscious. You were just like in your closet with Sybil.
Whatever the hell I want to say.
Yeah. Tappity, tappity, tap. And, 80,000 words later, it's done. And that ability to be untrammeled, uncaught by all the stuff that's swirling around us is the writer's task, because all that stuff gets in the way.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because some of the things in the book I would never have written if I thought someone was going to read it, because I was writing this book when everybody was so up in arms about you can't write that, your own story, not your life, not your story to tell, you can't, and I felt that fiction writers, I don't know if this is true here, this was certainly the feeling in the States, was fiction writers were like, well, what am I allowed to write then? Like, if I can't write a story about someone in a country I've never lived in or a life experience I've never had, then what can I write? And but I thought I was writing fiction because fiction is of the imagination and you can write some other story. But then it felt like and I've talked to other authors about this. I talked to Ann Patchett about this, and she said the same thing. I mean, she said, never had there been a conversation in fiction of you can't write that. It just was new. It was new. It was new. And so in this book, I wrote in the voice of a Syrian refugee. I wrote in the voice of a Holocaust survivor. I wrote in the voice of a boy who may or may not be on the autism spectrum. All these things that are not my life or not my experience. And at that moment in fiction, I think the tide has gone out on this, but the tide was fully in on if you write that, your career is over. You know, you're not allowed to write that. And so I would never have written this in the voice of Joan Didion. I mean, you're crazy.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's a letter. So a letter is a document, and you can it just is. You're not. It's not. I mean, it is writing, but it's not writing.
Yeah, but I still don't think I would have had the courage to say, I'm going to be a man from Syria. I'm going to get into the mind of a man from Syria. If I had thought I was going to show it to anyone, I think I would have been too scared. And I'm saying that your point is correct, that by not thinking it was going out for publication, by just writing the story I wanted to write, I wrote a good story.
A brilliant book. We've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes. Does anybody have any nice questions?
Virginia, I'm going to ask you to go back to those days when you were an undergraduate in Italy and just starting to write. And I really love the way you talked about finding your way. But I don't think that was only about finding your voice. It was finding your way as a worker, maybe, as how to work. And this is just a very prosaic question. Like, how much time were you putting in as this young person who didn't know any other writers, who hadn't had any conversations with writers about how many hours a day do you work? Do you count your pages or your words?
That's a really good question, because I didn't have anything to compare it to, but I was reading a lot. I was reading interviews with Hemingway, and I was reading, old essay. I was reading Stephen King's book on writing. I was reading anything I could find to somebody tell me how to do this. And, everybody has an opinion on what it takes, but I think there was some Hemingway interview I read from the Paris Review or something, and it was like 3 hours a day. And 3 hours a day, like, lodged in my brain. And so I probably wrote 7 days a week for like 15 years for like a couple hours, up to 3 hours a day. I mean, I started doing that when I was 19. I just think for a artistic, creative person, I'm very militaristic about my life. It's not like when I was in school, and I remember, I'm not going to say who, but I bet you would be able to think of who it is. This one person in my group, I remember that person saying, whenever I feel the, whatever the language was, whenever I feel the like lift of like the breeze of my brain, I sit down. And I was like, I've never felt the lift of the breeze one day of my life, but I still sit down every day. And I think I just knew that, but also maybe it is partly because no one was telling me, and I came from like a working family, not working class, but like sort of, where anything you do, you have to go and wake up and do it. You have to just do it. And so I just never thought of it as like I didn't think of it as my job, because I never made any money until like 6 months ago. But I treated it like my job, like probably. From the very beginning. So many hours. And now I think in some ways I look back and it was almost like maybe too much. Like I could have cut myself a break sometimes, like on Christmas. But I just didn't. And that's who I am. I'm a little more relaxed now, like 6 days a week.
I'm thinking about coming from a family where creativity was not like on the table in those years of just writing. And I am curious how your family responded. Did they know you were just what that was like?
Yeah, for a long time, no, I don't think they knew. And I still think like probably the majority of my family is kind of like, what do you do? Because they just don't, it's not I don't know. There's no context for this for them. I think now, now that there's going to be a movie, some of my family is like, wow, there's going to be a movie. But it wasn't the book that moves the needle. It's like a movie. I guess I think now I understand that I had courage, but I didn't know that that's what that was at the time. Just to do something with nobody saying it's okay, nobody saying yes, nobody pushing me, urging me forward or giving me any sort of feedback. It's very quiet. You would marvel at some of the conversations like at a family event or like a Christmas or something, even today about me and the book. It's just not held at it doesn't have a place of value, which I feel really comfortable with that. But I feel sort of sorry not for me, but like for them a little bit sometimes. Like, don't you see this is like there's a whole other I don't know thing, but I just I don't know. I was probably very like a lonely endeavor.
Can you talk a little bit about how you think working with Irish writers, studying here, being steeped in Irish literature has influenced you? Because my feeling being here is that value that we experience as American writers is so different here, even with ordinary people. And I wonder how you feel that shaped you, if you do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I feel here, I would be interested to see what you think about this answer. But my experience of coming here was that I came into a culture that embraced writers and the arts. And I never had felt that before. I'd never felt like it was valuable before. It didn't feel like a job. I don't know. I didn't feel like it was a job or something. And anything that was talked about in the world of publishing or books or anything in America felt very transactional and very like elitist. It's almost like you go to Iowa or bust or something, which I was never going to do. And I really was like revolted by the whole idea of a master's, an MFA. I thought and now that I've done it, I've done it here. I've never done an American MFA, and here it's not an MFA, it's an MPhil. And so I actually don't know what it's like to just go for an American MFA, but it all felt so like elite, little tiny pocket of people do that. And then, but it's sort of like that. And I didn't know anyone in it again. And so some of my conceptions might not be correct. But when I came here, it felt like, oh, we all agree this has value. As a culture, we agree this is valuable. And I was in school full time. It was a year full time. So I was no longer like writing until 7 a.m. and then like managing my children in my house. It was like my husband did that. And I was fully here, and I came to campus every day at 8 o'clock, and I stayed till 6 o'clock, and I wrote all day, and I worked, and I went to class. And so it elevated it for me in my own myself, what I saw as valuable for myself. But I also felt like in a culture where this is valuable. And like, if somebody said, what's your year in Ireland for? And I said, I'm, reading for my master's at Trinity and writing. Oh, it was like a response of, well done, you know, not sort of like a what are you doing? What are you trying to be? So I felt very held up here. Also, my biggest takeaway, which I always say from living here that year, was the way I can strip down to me the difference of living in America and living here is that when you meet an Irish person, when you meet in America, when you're introduced to someone, you say, "Hi, my name's Virginia." And what is the first question that somebody asks you? What do you do? Nobody ever asked me that here. Nobody. It is, where are you from? Or where does your family live? Or what team do you pull for? Or you know, anything else that actually defines a person is the first question. Because in America, we say, what do you do? Because we are putting you in a hierarchy of value. Oh, you're a doctor. Oh, you're a plumber. Oh, you're a bus driver. Oh, you're a politician. That is what that question is doing. And that is the American way. And we moved here and I felt free for the first time. And every time I come back, I feel that. I think so.
Well, there are no more questions. Oh, there is a question.
That was a mandate or a question?
Yeah.
Hi, that was wonderful, Virginia. Just wondering what you're working on now. If anything, I know it's been very busy.
Oh gosh, it's been very busy. I'm working on another novel, and it's going great. That's all I can say. I'm sure Carlo will read it here one of these months.
I'm looking forward to it.
If you have time.
I have the time. It's in the diary. The remarkable Virginia Evans, please show your appreciation.
Thanks again to Carlo University, Pittsburgh. And as always, information about Virginia's and Carlo's work can be found on our website, booksforbreakfastireland.buzzsprout.com.